We like to start our podcast with this one question, which we like to share with our audience for young and aspiring rugby players and coaches. What is the one lesson from the game that you have learned that you can share with the new generation of coaches and rugby players?
Yeah, gee, it's a good question, actually. It's quite interesting because recently, I've had reason to be reflecting on issues like this. I'm in a bit of a crossroads at the moment with my career and reevaluating certain things. And one of the things that I wanted to do as well is reevaluate, my philosophies and, where the game is going at the moment now. And so questions like that are particularly relevant at this moment in time, and I think I've probably landed on two significant areas for me. The one which I could give as a piece of information to as you say, young and aspiring players, but also guys who want to become coaches, maybe even very good players at the moment who aspire to do that. And that is, you know, it's a really interesting phenomenon when you look across the board and you have a look at an individual who has a desire to want to be in the game, whether that's as a player, as a coach. And then you look across the landscape and you see that. Let's talk about players for a moment now. The guy might be a particularly good player. He might be a back row. There's a lot of back rows, very good back rows. They're strong, they're athletic. Um, does he jump? Yes, he probably does jump. He's very good on the floor, carries well, blah, 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 blah. And then you've got to ask yourself, what's the point of difference? And where does the point of difference come in? And what is your point of difference that's going to make you stand out and stand out as I said, as a player that's going to make guys like you and I at Guthrie as coaches have a look
Mm.
at you, want to recruit you. And then more importantly, Ben, when you're actually within the squad, how often do we want to pick you and become and rely on you? And I think that has, as time has morphed and the game has morphed, I think that has certainly fallen within your personal ability to want to take your game to a different level. How much individual stuff are you doing on your own when, as they say in the cliche, the cameras aren't watching? When nobody's watching, when us as coaches aren't watching, how much work are you doing? If it's in Guthrow's area of expertise, how much work as a front row forward are you doing on your call, on your positioning, on your setups, for example? It's very easy for you to be able to set up something at home with some bands, and be able to do some setups. From a nines point of view, how often are you just in the back garden with a car tire, getting the ball away as quickly as possible, left and right, up against the target?
Yeah.
How hard are you working with your box kicks against the net? Et cetera, et cetera. And for me, what's happening now is because the competition pool of players is so big, it's so competitive. Unfortunately, with where the game is at the moment, in the UK, you see a couple of clubs have gone under. There's more players than there are opportunities for professional contracts.
No.
So you have to be
True.
a cut above the rest, and then you marry that
Yeah.
in with, your attitude and your demeanor towards a team sport,
Yeah.
because that's a particularly interesting thing as well. As you can be an exquisite individual, you can have unbelievable skills within that environment. But what do you bring to the team? You know what? Now, if
Yeah.
you're an introvert guy and you're not necessarily wanting to be loud and proud and be one of the guys in the forefront as a leader, that's fine. But do you bring that leadership in your training philosophy? Are you the first on the field or are you the last off the field? Again, and I want to stay away from the cliche type of things. I don't necessarily mean that everybody's going to be like Johnny Wilkinson, but when it's a particular area in your game that's maybe keeping you from not playing, what are you doing about that? And I think there's a bit of a tendency at the moment to, if you're born with a God-given talent and you're fantastic or you play and you're brave and you're strong and you tick all the boxes, and you probably are going to get a contract. What's making you that extra bit different? That 2% above the rest, and
Yeah.
and I think that's probably one of the lessons. Certainly as a younger coach, I went through the motions of a Gutty comes along, you pick Gutty, you play
Yeah.
him, and there's no issue with that. But how do you impart that knowledge to a player to say, how do you become the very best? And that brings me on to my second one, which is a coaching reflection on myself and many, many errors that I made and have made as a coach that I look back at. And individually, I've just asked the player to maybe give more of himself. What do we as coaches give more towards the individual? And I think a lot
True.
of the time as a coach, we can spend a lot of time with the group. So if if there was a time where I was a forwards coach, it would be with the forwards. If I was doing attack, it may only be around the attack. But how much time am I spending with the individual? And I feel, as a criticism towards myself over the years, I don't feel comfortable that I've spent enough time with the individual, getting the ideas of what that individual is thinking. What is it? He may have a very good idea that he doesn't feel comfortable to bring that to the group. You may get that out of him in a one-on-one. What do you know about him? What makes him tick? What's going on behind the scenes at home? What's his mental state like when he comes to a game or he comes to a training session? You know, you can choose to want to do this or not want to do this, but if you do want to delve into what's going on in his personal life and find out what's going on there, you'll get to know more about the individual. You'll build a better level of trust. And then when you do need to have those difficult conversations, or you need to be able to have a conversation of positivity towards it, you'll have a much stronger level of trust between yourself and the player. And that for me is something that, wherever my next venture is, something I'm going to put a lot of more time and energy into for myself as a coach.
Yeah.
Today's Lessons from the Game episode was possible thanks to the support of Harris Begley Financial Planning, headed up by former Blackheath player Matt Begley. They are the experts to speak to for tailored advice on investments, mortgages, insurance, and pensions, helping you plan for a future of financial security. So when you think money, think Harris Begley and head to www.harrisbegley.co.uk. Approve a Quilter Financial Services Limited and Quilter Mortgage Planning Limited, March 2025. Gary, that's brilliant. I like that what you just mentioned. Just to resume, you spoke about the point of difference, and you also spoke about what I really like is, I think, as a coach, that you're just like, okay, what can I do better? What am I doing to level up?
Yeah.
And you actually touched on something there, which, even we as coaches, we are looking, in the elite world of rugby, we get obsessed with analysis, with analyzing the opposition. What can we do better? We're spending time in front of our computers. We're having all these meetings and, player relationships, that's so important. And, you touch base on that. So like you mentioned, that's something you'll be focused. I think we get so consumed, like a week flies by as a coach. You need to do this, you need to tick this box, you need to prepare for this meeting, you need to prepare for that session. But what would you say, like, if you can do things differently, how would you develop that player and coach relationship? We've noticed that over the years, players have changed, are different compared to us back in the day, what you had to deal with in 2008 till 2011. We'll deep dive into that. You have some questions you need to answer for me. But
Yes, I'll be the mediator.
You're the mediator.
Yeah.
But, it interested me because I'm reading up a lot as well as a coach, in terms of how to communicate with players, identify what type of profile. You spoke about them, how they are at home, their mental health. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that? How would you go about developing a player relationship with the coach?
I think the player relationship with the coach relationship with the player.
Well, the relationship between the player and the coach, if I can.
I think for me, Gutty, and again, it's just my personal opinion, is I would start from a position of formality. And what I mean by that is I'd actually have a consistent document, or whatever you want to call it. You may call it KPIs. I might call it a performance development plan. Whatever you call it, I would start with some form of formality. So I would have something that firstly is consistent across all players. So every player within the group knows that you're both going to be covering off the same document or worksheet or whatever it is. The reason why that's important is because you want to expel any fears of bias. You don't want one player to think that your one-on-one was a coffee with me for 10 minutes at the local coffee shop, but my one-on-one with him was a beer for 3 hours that evening, and we ended up actually becoming friends of it. You want to just keep a formal, official relationship initially. If that forms into a friendship, I personally don't have an issue with that. I know there's guys who've written and studied about that who say you should keep that separate. I'm not quite sure about that, but I think that if you start off with a level of formality and you're going to go through performance development plan, for use of a better terminology, where I'm going to sit down with the player, I'm going to say, where do you think you're playing well, what do you think you're doing well? Where do you think you can improve? And then I'll share my views with that on you as well.
Okay.
For me, again, ultimately, I never played at your guys' level. Remember, I wasn't a Test Springbok like that. I didn't win Super Rugby Championship with arguably the best domestic team in the 2000s that ever played. So which is a benefit for me as a coach, is because I don't rely on my playing expertise, which can sometimes become a little bit of it can be a bit of a crutch for some players. I just rely on the facts. So I want to sit down with a plan. I want to say, this is exactly what I've seen you do in the game. Here's how I'm corroborating that with the data, or the fact. I don't like the word data or stats. I like facts. And then sit down and have the video session with the guy and show him what you're talking about. Let him talk to you about what he wants to get across to you. And then there's an even playing field. Then you're talking from facts and he's talking from facts. There's no emotions in the equation. You're quite literally sitting with an employee to all intent and purposes, and you're having a review with him on his performance. Again, you're coming from a point where we're very lucky within the professional game. The guy is good enough already. All right. You're not going like in the school teacher. You're not going to the principal's office if you've done something wrong. You're sitting with a coach because you want to get better as a coach. I want to build a better relationship with you as a player, and I want to see you get better as a player. So that if you're coming from that premise and you understand that, then the review that you're doing, it's not a personal thing. I couldn't really, it doesn't affect me if Guthrow's cleaning ability at the breakdown is good enough or not good enough. I'm just going to share that as a fact with him. But I will have the conversation with him and say to him, that's the reason potentially why this other guy's playing and you're not playing, because in your role for the needs of our team and the way we want to play the game, these are the specifics that you're not doing well enough according to what us as a coaching group or the head coach or myself as the head coach or whatever it is, what we require. Whether we're right or wrong, that's another debate. But at least the players get to know where you stand and you then clear the air from that point